Hello guys, tonight we step into an alternate past. Not one defined by the creak of ships on the Atlantic waves, or the grip of a sailor clutching a compass, but by an absence. Imagine a world where the sails of Columbus never caught the wind, where the ocean remained an untouched boundary. Close your eyes and picture it. Not the triumphant cry of "land ahead," but the fragile, invisible spark of imagination. The human drive to wonder what lies beyond the horizon. Suspended, waiting for another dreamer to answer its call. History as we know it hinges on curiosity. But curiosity can be delayed, redirected, or even silenced by circumstance. Imagine, then, that the Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus never set sail westward in 1492. Whether through fate, illness, or political rejection, his ships remain tethered to European shores. The ocean stays untraversed, and the Americas remain hidden from European empires for decades, perhaps even centuries. The story of our world fractures here into 1,000 different paths, each glowing with possibility. Before diving into this altered stream of time, let's set the stage. By the late 15th century, Europe is a continent caught between hunger and ambition. The Ottoman Empire controls eastern trade routes, forcing merchants to dream of new passages to Asia. Spain, newly unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, craves wealth to solidify its rising power. Portugal pushes along the African coast, inching toward the riches of India. In this crucible of competition, Columbus promises a shortcut across the ocean. Yet in our version, that promise never leaves the parchment. What happens when the spark never ignites? Without Columbus's voyage, Spain turns its gaze elsewhere. Instead of the Caribbean, its armies pour deeper into North Africa, seeking control of trade hubs and fertile lands. Portugal continues eastward, cementing colonies from Cape Verde to Calicut, building a maritime empire without rivals in the west. The Atlantic, vast and silent, becomes a boundary rather than a bridge. Indigenous civilizations in the Americas, the Aztec, Inca, Maya, Mississippian, and countless others, continue their own rhythms, untouched by the European storm that in our timeline would soon overwhelm them. At first, Europe scarcely notices the absence. Silk still flows, spices still dazzle, and gold still tempts, though in smaller streams. But as years turn into decades, the lack of a Western continent reshapes everything. Economies that once ballooned with silver from Potosi remain constrained. Monarchies without the influx of colonial wealth face slower growth, their ambitions tempered. Wars are fewer, empires smaller, and beyond the ocean, entire worlds of knowledge, agriculture, and culture continue to evolve in solitude. This is where our journey begins. Not with the planting of a Spanish flag on a Caribbean beach, but with the silence of a voyage never made. A silence that echoes across centuries, reshaping the destiny of nations, faiths, and ideas. In the silence of an unbroken ocean, time folds differently. Let's step into Europe, a continent unaware of what it has lost, or perhaps spared from. It is the year 1493. In our timeline, Columbus would have been greeted with parades, letters of title, and promises of glory. But here, he is merely another obscure sailor with ideas dismissed as folly, his petitions collecting dust in Spanish archives. The court whispers of wasted hours and suspect calculations. The monarchs who once risked ships for his dream instead commit their coffers to wars nearer home. Spain, restless after expelling the Moors from Granada, redirects its energies south. North Africa becomes the frontier of expansion. Tangier, Oran, Tunis, and Algiers are eyed not as stepping stones, but as destinations themselves. Spanish knights clash with Berber tribes, while merchants establish tenuous trade outposts. The dream of empire does not die. It simply shifts across the Mediterranean. Portugal thrives under this shift. With no Spanish rival in the west, Portuguese caravels dominate the seas. Vasco da Gama's journey around Africa still succeeds, binding Lisbon to the riches of India. Over decades, Portugal becomes the unchallenged gatekeeper of Asian goods, its navy patrolling the Indian Ocean with near impunity. Gold, ivory, pepper, cinnamon, and porcelain flow through Portuguese ports, elevating a small kingdom into the beating heart of global commerce. Meanwhile, far across the Atlantic, the great civilizations continue undisturbed. In Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, festivals burst with song and sacrifice, canals shimmer with painted canoes, and marketplaces teem with goods brought from every corner of Mesoamerica. The Inca Empire extends its roads through the Andes, its runners carrying messages faster than most horses in Europe. The Mississippian mound cities by the rivers pulse with trade and ceremony. None know how narrowly their world has escaped the storm of steel and smallpox. But fate abhors stagnation. Ideas still flicker. Whispers rise in seaports from Genoa to Bristol. Tales of lands across the horizon. Fishermen chasing cod in the far Atlantic report strange birds, drifting logs carved by unfamiliar hands, and thick seaweed hinting at shores unseen. Though Columbus is forgotten, the lure of the unknown lingers. By the early 16th century, another wave of dreamers takes shape. English and French merchants, long envious of Iberian monopolies, wonder if the ocean hides something more than fish. Yet without the precedent of Columbus, they lack urgency, courage, and crucial proof. Their voyages remain hesitant, hugging coasts, probing cautiously but never striking boldly westward. The Renaissance still blossoms. Art, science, and philosophy expand Europe's horizons inward. But the outward leap, the leap that would change every corner of the earth, lies dormant. The clock of discovery ticks slower, as though the world itself holds its breath. It is a fragile equilibrium, and like all equilibriums, it cannot last. Europe simmers with ambition, but without a Western prize. Its energy pours into familiar patterns of rivalry. Spain wages campaigns in North Africa, pressing deeper into Berber strongholds. Portugal plants its banners across the Indian Ocean, raising fortresses in Goa, Malacca, and Hormuz. France eyes Italy, not distant seas. England, too poor and politically unstable, keeps its navy close to home. What would have been the first tendrils of colonization in the Caribbean have instead become bloody stalemates on the shores of the Mediterranean. Spanish soldiers die in the deserts of Morocco, their bones bleaching under the sun, while caravans of camels carry spices inland, bypassing Iberian ambitions. The Ottomans expand as well, swallowing Egypt in 1517, and tightening their grip on eastern trade. A great contest brews not across oceans, but across sand and stone. And yet the Atlantic refuses to be silent forever. Along the coast of Newfoundland, Basque and Breton fishermen discover the richest cod banks in the world. They sail home with ships so heavy with fish, they ride low in the water. Rumors spread of strange forests glimpsed through morning fog, of shorelines unmarked on maps, of rivers flowing inland past the reach of sight. The merchants of Bristol whisper about sending expeditions, but without Spanish precedent, their kings hesitate. Such ventures cost dearly, and no monarch wishes to gamble fortune on shadows. Meanwhile, in the Americas, life thrives. The Aztecs continue to expand, demanding tribute from conquered peoples. Tenochtitlan swells with goods, turquoise, cacao, feathers brighter than jewels, obsidian blades sharper than steel. The Inca push their empire further south, carving terraces into mountainsides, extending roads that weave across an empire stretching thousands of miles. Mississippian cultures along the great rivers consolidate trade networks, exchanging shells, copper, and stories from one end of the continent to the other. Unbeknownst to them, their world is in a rare window of grace. Disease has not crossed the ocean. Horses have not thundered across their fields. Cannons have not shattered their walls. They continue their paths in uninterrupted rhythm, shaping destinies untouched by European hunger. But history is patient. By the 1520s, whispers grow louder in Europe. If Portugal commands the East, what remains for Spain, France, and England? Every merchant knows fortunes lie in discovery, not in stalemate. And so, though Columbus's name has faded into obscurity, the spark he once tried to kindle begins to glow again. This time in other hands, other nations, with other destinies. The question is no longer if someone will cross the Atlantic. The question is when, and who will arrive first. In our history, Hernán Cortés would have already brought down the Aztec Empire. But in this timeline, the Valley of Mexico still echoes with the drums of ritual, the bustle of markets, and the clamor of canals. Let us step into that world for a moment. Imagine a merchant named Xochitl walking through the great market of Tlatelolco. Around her rise stalls laden with cacao beans, quetzal feathers, obsidian blades, jade ornaments, and pottery painted with brilliant designs. Tens of thousands fill the plaza, trading goods from every corner of the empire. The air is filled with the smell of roasted maize and chili, the chant of priests in nearby temples, and the cries of hawkers advertising wares. For Xochitl, the world is rich, vibrant, and whole. Across the ocean, Europe may battle for spices, but here the wealth of the land is endless. Far to the south, in the Andes, Incan engineers stretch their roads ever further, connecting mountain to valley, coast to jungle. Runners carry messages sealed in knotted quipu cords, covering distances no European could match without horse or wheel. They have no inkling that across the sea, another continent debates whether their world even exists. And in Europe, the debate grows restless. King Francis I of France, bitter at Portugal's dominance in the east, funds Giovanni da Verrazzano to probe westward. In 1524, he sails into the waters of what will one day be called North America. His expedition hugs the coastline, mapping bays and inlets, but he dares not press inland. The reports he brings back speak of forests without end, lands rich with potential, but no golden empires, no silks, no spices. For now, the French crown files it away as curiosity, not conquest. England too toys with the Atlantic. Bristol merchants sponsor tiny expeditions, led by obscure captains whose names will be half remembered in guild records. They return with furs, strange carved masks, and stories of vast empty coasts. But empty coasts do not fill treasuries. Kings and queens want gold, not timber. The lure is there, but not yet irresistible. Spain watches uneasily. With no claim to the West, its nobles mutter that Portugal has cheated them, cornering the riches of the known world. They dream of turning back the Treaty of Tordesillas, of seizing more than barren deserts in Africa. Some whisper again of that Genoese fool, Columbus, and wonder if they dismissed him too soon. But history rarely repeats its offers. The ships that might have carried his dream have long since rotted, and the man himself, old, bitter, and forgotten, fades into obscurity. The Atlantic remains a border, not a bridge. Yet with each passing year it grows thinner. Fishermen know there is land beyond. Explorers sketch its outline. One day soon Europe's hunger will cross it. And when it does, the world will shift. Not in 1492, but decades later. Under new banners with consequences no one yet foresees. Europe stands at a crossroads. The Reformation splits Christendom. Luther's theses ripple through villages and courts alike, and monarchs weigh faith against politics. Amid this storm of religion and rebellion, another question rises like a shadow on the horizon. What lies beyond the Atlantic? By now, fishermen no longer bother to hide their discoveries. Breton and Basque fleets sail each summer to Newfoundland, their holds swelling with cod. Some venture ashore to repair nets, boil down blubber, or cut timber, and they return with reports of vast forests and endless rivers. Slowly, whispers transform into maps. Coastlines sketched with hesitant ink appear in guild halls and libraries. Still incomplete, still uncertain, but undeniable. France grows bolder. In 1534, Jacques Cartier sets sail under Francis I. He explores the Gulf of St. Lawrence, claiming lands in the king's name. He writes of fertile soil, teeming game, and peoples who trade willingly. Yet, what he does not find is gold. France, burdened by wars in Italy and the Reformation's turmoil, lacks the appetite to invest heavily. Cartier's voyages are noted, admired, and shelved. The Western continent remains a curiosity, not a prize. England, fractured under Henry VIII's break from Rome, pays little attention. Its navy patrols the Channel, its energy spent in securing its own independence from papal rule. Expeditions westward seem indulgent luxuries. The Atlantic mystery will wait. And so, while Europe squabbles and reforms, The Americas remain in bloom. In the Valley of Mexico, Xochitl, the merchant we glimpsed earlier, sees her fortunes rise as trade intensifies. Tribute flows from conquered cities, filling Tenochtitlan with goods unimaginable to Europeans. The empire grows heavier with its own weight, but outwardly it shines. In the Andes, the Inca face their own fractures. Succession disputes spark whispers of war between royal lineages, yet their roads and armies remain strong, their engineers raising terraces higher into the mountains, their empire stretching farther than Rome at its peak. Mississippian cultures adapt and thrive, riverside mounds expanding, trade caravans carrying copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf, and obsidian from far to the west. These networks strengthen, knitting communities across thousands of miles. Unseen by all, the Atlantic still churns as silent witness. The longer Europe delays, the stronger these civilizations grow. The deeper their roots, the more entangled their politics. When the meeting finally comes, it will not be a storm overwhelming fragile saplings. It will be a clash of trees with trunks already wide, branches already spread across continents. Europe has postponed its destiny, but destiny does not vanish. It gathers, waits, and prepares to strike with double the force when the moment arrives. In our world, by now, Spanish conquistadors would have shattered empires and flooded Europe with silver. But here, Europe still waits, restless and unsatisfied. Spain, frustrated at Portugal's dominance in Asia, bleeds itself in wars against the Ottomans and in campaigns along the North African coast. Galleys patrol the Mediterranean, not galleons across the Atlantic. The wealth of an empire-to-be never arrives. Castile and Aragon remain powerful, yes, but not yet the titan that history once forged them into. Portugal, meanwhile, grows arrogant. With no Spanish rival across the ocean, it continues expanding eastward. Goa, Malacca, Macau. Its sailors reached Japan by the early 1540s, ferrying muskets, silk, and knowledge. Lisbon becomes a jeweled city, a hub where merchants from Venice, Antwerp, and London come to buy the treasures of the East. But Portugal is small, and its grip overstretched. Without the balancing weight of Spain's Western Empire, its dominance will one day falter. Across the sea, the great American civilizations approach turning points of their own. In the Andes, a brutal civil war erupts between two Incan brothers, Huascar and Atahualpa. In our timeline, Spanish steel and horses tip the scales, but in this world, the war plays out on Andean terms alone. Armies of tens of thousands clashing on mountain passes, fortresses changing hands, and entire valleys devastated. It is a conflict no less destructive without Europeans, but its resolution is wholly indigenous. Atahualpa eventually triumphs, uniting the empire under his rule. The scars remain, but the Inca survive. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec Empire continues to strain under the weight of tribute and conquest. Rebellions flicker, quickly extinguished by imperial armies, but unrest lingers. Priests demand more sacrifices, rulers demand more loyalty, merchants demand more goods. Like Rome before it, the Aztec state grows too vast, too complex. Yet, in the absence of foreign invaders, it has time to adapt, to bend rather than shatter. And in Europe, a single event shifts the tempo once more. In 1541, King Francis I authorizes another westward expedition, convinced that somewhere beyond the fog lies a passage to Asia. This time, French ships linger longer, exploring deeper into the St. Lawrence River. They return not with gold, but with furs, soft pelts of beaver, fox, and otter, so fine they rival the silks of Venice. Fur begins to trickle into Parisian markets, and nobles marvel at cloaks warmer and richer than anything they have known. A spark has been lit, small but steady. Still, the scale is modest. France cannot yet divert armies or fleets to build colonies. The Reformation and wars with the Habsburgs consume too much of its strength. But the idea has entered Europe. The western lands may not hold cities of gold, but they hold wealth all the same. The dam of hesitation begins to crack. The Atlantic, patient for half a century, prepares at last to open. Europe is changing fast. The Renaissance has matured. Printing presses scatter ideas faster than monarchs can control them, and the Reformation burns across the continent like wildfire. The struggle between Protestant and Catholic is now the dominant narrative of kings and commoners alike. And yet, beneath the thunder of sermons and swords, the Atlantic still whispers. France makes the most deliberate moves. Fur from across the ocean, rare and warm, is becoming fashionable among nobles. A new industry begins to grow, one that promises steady profit if expanded. Traders argue that while Asia holds spices and silks, the Western lands offer something more enduring: clothing, protection, status. Francis I and later Henry II cannot afford large colonization projects. France bleeds resources in wars against the Habsburgs. But the seed of an Atlantic strategy is planted. Spain, distracted by empire in Europe and battles with the Ottomans, feels unease. Portuguese wealth from Asia is undeniable, and now French ventures hint at a Western threat. Courtiers whisper, did they miss their chance by dismissing Columbus? Did they leave a continent's worth of riches in the hands of others? The monarchs frown, but resources are scarce, armies stretched, and the treasury thin. Spain remains hesitant, though its envy grows. England stirs as well. Henry VIII is gone. Edward VI a child king. The realm quakes between Protestant and Catholic factions, but merchants in Bristol and London begin pressing harder, lobbying for expeditions across the sea. They argue that if France and Portugal carve pieces of the world, England will be left with nothing. The crown is distracted, but ambition is rising. And across the Atlantic, the Aztec world in 1550 is alive with contradiction. Tenochtitlan is a city of dazzling order and beauty. Pyramids piercing the sky, canals glinting in sunlight, markets crowded with tens of thousands. Yet beneath the grandeur lies unrest. Subject peoples resent tribute and sacrifice. Merchants thrive, priests demand more blood, and the nobility grows decadent. Rebellions flare and fade. Still the empire holds, adapting, surviving, evolving on its own terms. The Inca, recovering from their civil war, push outward again. Atahualpa's heirs consolidate power, repairing roads, redistributing land, and expanding terraces to feed their people. Fortresses rise on high passes, and armies stand ready. Their empire is no longer fragile. It is resilient, hardened by internal conflict. And here lies the key difference in this alternate timeline. The Americas are not frozen in the moment before collapse, awaiting a foreign hammer. They are moving, shifting, transforming just as Europe does. Each year of delay makes them stronger, not weaker. But delay cannot last forever. By the 1560s, storms of war in Europe will begin to subside. Kings will turn their gaze outward once more, seeking new avenues for wealth and glory. And when they do, the Atlantic, silent for so long, will roar. The map of Europe is scarred with religious conflict. But slowly, exhaustion begins to settle. Armies lick their wounds, monarchs sign uneasy truces, and attention drifts back to trade, wealth, and opportunity. For half a century, the Atlantic has been a frontier of whispers. Now, at last, it becomes a stage. France pushes first. Traders from Normandy and Brittany return with holds full of furs, proof that steady profit can be made across the sea. Expeditions grow bolder, not only skimming coasts but building seasonal camps. Indigenous peoples along the St. Lawrence and Gulf of St. Lawrence begin to meet these strange newcomers. Small in number, curious, more interested in pelts than conquest. Alliances are tentative, exchanges cautious. The French are not yet conquerors. They are traders, reliant on local knowledge for survival. England begins to stir. Elizabeth I, cautious but ambitious, listens to her merchants. They urge her to stake claims before France grows too entrenched. In 1570, tentative voyages probe the Atlantic. Ships return with glowing tales of fertile soil and forests that could supply timber for a navy. More importantly, they bring rumors. There are lands enough to rival the riches of Asia, if only England dares seize them. Spain, however, feels the pressure most keenly. Its empire in this alternate world is thinner, poorer, Without American silver, its monarchy struggles to finance wars. Gold from Africa and trade with Italy cannot match the fortunes that Portugal draws from Asia. And now France and England toy with the Atlantic? To Spanish eyes, this is intolerable. They must act or risk being left behind. But the decades of hesitation have changed the game. When Europe finally pushes westward in earnest, it no longer encounters the fragile moment of Aztec or Inca weakness. Instead, it finds continents alive with power. Tenochtitlan, in 1570, is a metropolis of hundreds of thousands. Its markets hum louder than ever, tribute still flows, and though rebellions flicker, imperial reforms stabilize much of the realm. Priests invoke the gods atop temples, but merchants and nobles increasingly shape politics behind the scenes. The empire is uneasy but far from collapse. In the Andes, the Inca, scarred but strengthened by civil war, are formidable. Their armies, disciplined and massive, dominate mountain passes. Their road networks allow rapid response to uprisings. Agricultural terraces expand, feeding more mouths. The empire is tense but resilient. Even the Mississippian cultures, often overlooked in our timeline, have grown denser. Along the great rivers, mound cities flourish as trade hubs, moving goods over immense distances. Copper, shells, obsidian, and stories bind communities together. Though less centralized than Aztec or Inca states, they form webs of alliances that provide strength against outside intrusion. Europe will not find easy prey. It will find nations capable of meeting them as rivals, not just victims. And as the 1570s approach, the ocean no longer feels like a boundary. It feels like an invitation, one that Europe can no longer refuse. The Atlantic, once silent, is now alive with sails. French, English, and Spanish ships all dip their keels into waters long neglected, each nation desperate to seize what it believes should be its share of the world. The delay of 8 decades has turned the race into a frenzy, and what might once have been tentative encounters now carries the weight of desperation. France presses hardest. Fur trading posts sprout along the Gulf of St. Lawrence, their wooden palisades fragile against the vast forests. Indigenous groups, Algonquin, Mi'kmaq, Huron, welcome these strangers cautiously, trading pelts for iron tools, cloth, and beads. Yet these alliances are fragile, for the French are still too few, too dependent. They are not conquerors but partners, and their survival hinges on diplomacy. England follows. Elizabeth I authorizes voyages westward, seeking not just trade but territory. In 1578, an English expedition lands on the North American coast. They erect crude shelters, claim the land in the Queen's name, and send back glowing reports. Timber, farmland, and space, England's future, they insist, lies across the sea. But hardships mount quickly. Starvation, disease, conflicts with local tribes. Most attempts fail, but the will to try again grows stronger. Spain, however, faces the greatest dilemma. Without American silver, its treasury is weak. Its wars against the Ottomans and in the Netherlands drain gold faster than it can be replaced. Watching France and England nibble at the Atlantic enrages the Spanish court. If they cannot dominate the East, then they must at least seize the West before rivals become too entrenched. By the late 1570s, Spanish galleons begin patrolling further into the ocean, determined to stake a claim at last. But the world they sail toward is no longer waiting passively. In the Valley of Mexico, the Aztec Empire sees the first rumors of pale-skinned strangers from the east. Fishermen whisper of odd ships glimpsed offshore, of objects traded from wandering tribes. The imperial court debates their meaning. Merchants argue they are potential allies. Priests warn of omens, weaving stories of gods or demons returning from the sea. Unlike in our timeline, these strangers are not immediately overwhelming. They are few, fragile, uncertain. The Aztecs see them not as conquerors, but as curiosities, perhaps threats, perhaps tools. In the Andes, the Inca too hear rumors carried northward along trade routes, of floating houses on the sea, of men with shining weapons. Atahualpa's descendants, ruling with caution after the Civil War, prepare their armies but do not panic. They know outsiders exist. They have traded indirectly with distant peoples for centuries. But these ocean strangers are too scattered to alarm a continent-spanning empire. For now, the Mississippian world also stirs. Leaders along the great rivers hear tales of pale traders exchanging iron for furs. Some see opportunity, others danger. Councils are called, alliances debated. The first threads of transatlantic contact have been woven, and they ripple outward into every corner of indigenous diplomacy. Europe has finally arrived, but not with overwhelming force. Instead, it has stumbled into a continent alive, strong, and wary. The stage is set for something far different from conquest. The coming decades will decide, will the Atlantic become a bridge of trade or a battlefield of empires? The Atlantic is no longer a rumor. It is a highway. Ships from France, Spain, and England cross more regularly, though not yet in vast fleets. Colonies are attempted, some abandoned, some barely surviving. Every power senses opportunity, but none can yet grasp it firmly. The delay of nearly a century has given the Americas time to strengthen, and that changes everything. France establishes semi-permanent posts along the St. Lawrence, trading with local tribes. English settlers attempt footholds along the Atlantic coast, struggling against hunger, storms, and resistance from native confederacies. Spain, desperate not to fall behind, sends expeditions into the Caribbean at last, building small forts on scattered islands. But when they look west, toward the vast mainland, they do not find fractured empires ready to topple. They find nations in their prime. In 1587, a Spanish expedition makes landfall on the coast of Mexico. Expecting scattered villages, they instead encounter emissaries of the Aztec Empire. The meeting is tense. Spanish armor glints in the sun. Aztec warriors stand in disciplined ranks, their obsidian-edged weapons sharp, their feathered standards rising like banners of fire. The Spaniards present gifts, mirrors, beads, steel knives. The Aztec reply with cacao, cloaks, and questions. Who are these pale strangers? What do they seek? Unlike in our history, the Spaniards cannot bluff or coerce. They are too few, their supplies too thin, their backing too fragile. The Aztec do not see them as gods, nor as conquerors. They see them as peculiar traders who might be useful or dangerous. For now, diplomacy wins out. The Spaniards are escorted inland, not as conquerors but as guests, forced to walk humbly through the markets of Tenochtitlan, overwhelmed by its grandeur. In the Andes, a similar encounter unfolds. Portuguese sailors, straying far from their usual routes, anchor near the coast of Peru. Inca patrols seize them quickly. These strangers are interrogated, fed, and studied. Their weapons are admired, but not feared. The Inca rulers decide these people may be useful for their metals, perhaps even as allies against hostile tribes. But they are not a threat, not yet. Meanwhile, in the Mississippian world, English and French traders find themselves negotiating with powerful confederacies that control river valleys. Iron knives and hatchets are eagerly exchanged for furs, but the newcomers are closely watched. Councils debate whether these strangers are wanderers to be tolerated, or seeds of danger to be uprooted. Back in Europe, news spreads. The Spaniards' letters about the Aztec capital ignite imaginations. But unlike Cortés in our timeline, no general dares to promise conquest. Instead, pamphlets circulate, calling for alliances, trade agreements, and gradual encroachment. Monarchs dream of riches, but they also fear a drawn-out war with empires as large as their own. And so the great irony unfolds. Columbus never sailed. And now, nearly a century later, Europe discovers not a world vulnerable to collapse, but a world capable of standing toe-to-toe with them. Contact has come, but conquest remains out of reach. The question is no longer, can Europe conquer the Americas, but rather, can Europe survive the encounter? Europe is a cauldron of ambition and exhaustion. The wars of religion tear at France, the Dutch revolt grinds Spain's strength, and Elizabethan England fends off plots and armadas. Across the continent, kings and princes weigh their fortunes carefully. Yet despite the turmoil, the Atlantic remains irresistible. By now, there is no denying it. The Americas are real, rich, and powerful. Every sailor returning from Newfoundland, the Caribbean, or the Mexican coast brings tales of vast cities, disciplined armies, and markets overflowing with goods unseen in Europe. These are not lands to be seized in a single campaign. They are civilizations to be negotiated with, rivaled, and perhaps slowly undermined. Spain moves first, though its steps are cautious. After the humiliation of the failed Armada in 1588, Philip II cannot risk another disaster. Still, he authorizes fortified outposts in the Caribbean, hoping to establish supply bases for future ventures. Spanish captains, hardened by wars in the Netherlands, attempt expeditions toward Mexico, but they find themselves outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and dependent on Aztec goodwill. Instead of conquest, they settle for uneasy trade, metals and cloth exchanged for cacao and feathers. It is not glory, but it is survival. France, recovering from civil war, turns again to the fur trade. Seasonal posts along the St. Lawrence become more permanent, though they remain fragile, dependent on alliances with indigenous confederacies. French merchants learn native tongues, marry into local families, and become intermediaries rather than masters. Paris watches with cautious optimism. Here lies wealth that does not demand armies, only patience. England, emboldened after defeating Spain's Armada, makes bolder moves. Small groups of settlers attempt to plant roots along the Atlantic coast. Most falter, but each attempt builds experience. Timber, tobacco, and furs trickle back to London. More importantly, English propaganda paints the New World not as enemy territory, but as a frontier where ordinary men might carve out fortunes. Dreams of empire take hold in the English imagination, even if reality lags behind. And what of the Americas? The Aztec Empire, aware of the growing trickle of foreign ships, grows wary but not fearful. Emperors convene councils with priests, merchants, and warriors. Some advocate seizing these pale strangers as tribute. Others argue for trade, seeing iron and steel as valuable additions to their arsenals. The empire experiments, allowing certain foreigners to live in controlled districts under watch, their movements restricted. The balance remains intact. Europe is curious, but the Aztec are confident. In the Andes, the Inca take a harder stance. Coastal patrols monitor foreign ships, preventing deep incursions. Trade is allowed only under strict terms, with strangers treated as distant partners rather than equals. The Sapa Inca sees little reason to welcome outsiders. His empire is self-sufficient, powerful, and still expanding. In the river valleys of North America, indigenous confederacies grow accustomed to European goods. Copper knives and stone axes give way to iron hatchets and steel blades, but the tribes remain wary. They know that trade comes with strings, and they debate fiercely in council. Will these pale strangers remain trading partners, or will they attempt to become rulers? As the century closes, the stage is set for a very different 1600s. Europe has not conquered the Americas. Instead, it has met them and found them formidable. The next century will not be a story of conquest alone, but of rivalry, diplomacy, and the uneasy dance of civilizations. Europe has entered a new age, scarred by wars of religion, but steadied by the ambitions of monarchs who see the Atlantic as their chance at redemption. The 16th century was hesitation. The 17th will be struggle. England leads with persistence. The failures of earlier colonies teach hard lessons. Poor planning, lack of supplies, and constant conflict with local peoples doom reckless ventures. But in 1607, after years of debate, a determined expedition establishes a permanent settlement along the North American coast. The settlers name it after their king, a bold declaration of permanence. Life is brutal. Harvests fail, disease spreads, and local tribes test the newcomers' resolve. But this time, England refuses to abandon its claim. The dream of a foothold across the ocean is too vital to let die. France follows with renewed vigor. Traders in the St. Lawrence deepen their ties with indigenous allies. Fur becomes the lifeblood of French ventures, a resource that pours silver into Parisian coffers without the need for conquest. French captains learn that survival means intermarriage, alliance, and trust. The French crown, though distracted by continental politics, sees the value. Colonies built not by brute force, but by diplomacy. Spain, once supreme, now struggles. Without the river of silver that in another timeline filled its treasuries, its armies bleed in the Netherlands and against Protestant foes. The Caribbean outposts it plants are precarious, sustained only by naval might. Spaniards who dream of conquering Mexico return with stories of humiliation. Aztec armies too vast to confront, markets too controlled to infiltrate. For the first time in centuries, Spain feels weakness. Pride demands expansion, but reality demands retreat. And in the Americas, the Aztec Empire enters the 17th century at the height of its splendor. Tenochtitlan swells with people, its markets unmatched anywhere in the world. The emperors watch foreign incursions closely, allowing controlled trade but forbidding expansion. Foreigners are tolerated only as long as they are useful. Priests call them omens, merchants call them opportunities, warriors call them future enemies. For now, the empire balances between openness and vigilance. The Inca too stand strong. Their roads bind the Andes, their armies patrol mountains and valleys. European steel weapons filter slowly into their hands through trade, but these are absorbed, not feared. The Sapa Inca sees these foreigners as another tribe to be managed, a distant nuisance, not a serious threat. In the Mississippian world, change is faster. Confederacies along the rivers welcome iron tools and firearms trickling from French and English traders. Some tribes grow more powerful, leveraging alliances with Europeans to dominate rivals. Others resist, fearing dependence. Internal politics become more volatile, not less, as foreign goods shift balances of power. And across the ocean, a dangerous realization takes root in Europe. Conquest may no longer be possible, but influence, trade, alliance, manipulation can still tilt the balance. If armies cannot win the Americas, perhaps diplomacy and division can. The 17th century will not be a simple story of one side conquering the other. It will be a chessboard, vast and complex, with kings and emperors, tribes and settlers, merchants and priests all moving their pieces across the Atlantic. The game has begun. The Atlantic is now a web of routes, fishing fleets, fur traders, scattered settlements, and cautious embassies. What once was a rumor has become routine. But routine is fragile. With every passing year, the stakes grow higher, and both Europe and the Americas sense the shift. England clings to its coastal settlements. Life is harsh, but tobacco, discovered, cultivated, and shipped east, becomes the lifeline. Demand in London surges. Suddenly, the colonies are not just vanity projects. They are economic engines. Settlers, once starving and desperate, are reinforced with fresh waves of migrants chasing profit. Timber, tobacco, and furs begin to fill English ships, and the crown sees its gamble paying off. Yet conflict with nearby confederacies intensifies. Treaties are signed and broken. Trade sometimes ends in blood. Neither side trusts the other, yet both need what the other offers. France deepens its foothold in the St. Lawrence. Jesuits arrive, bringing faith as well as trade. Some tribes welcome alliances against rivals. Others resent the growing foreign presence. French captains learn to navigate politics as carefully as rivers. They are fewer in number than the English, but better integrated, more willing to adapt. Paris applauds cautiously. Spain, however, suffers humiliation. Its envoys in Mexico City are tightly controlled by the Aztec emperor. Trade occurs under strict surveillance, foreign merchants confined to quarters, unable to spread influence freely. Spanish captains write bitter reports. The empire of Tenochtitlan is no naive kingdom. It is as disciplined and suspicious as any European court. Dreams of conquest vanish. The reality of stalemate sets in. Spain's prestige slips, its rivals mock its failures, and its colonies lag behind. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the empires grow more aware of the creeping foreign tide. The Aztec rulers begin to debate foreign policy more seriously. Some argue for cutting off trade entirely, fearing foreign spies. Others insist that European tools and steel must be absorbed to strengthen the empire. Priests weave prophecies into politics. warning of divine upheaval should outsiders gain too much influence. Markets swell with curiosity over imported goods, but suspicion grows. The empire senses it stands at the edge of a new kind of conflict, one not of spears and obsidian alone, but of ideas, alliances, and shadows. The Inca, far to the south, adopt a harder line. The Sapa Inca declares that foreigners are to be confined to controlled enclaves, never allowed to wander freely. Incan engineers replicate steel weapons with local skill, reducing dependence on trade. They fortify ports, expand armies, and prepare for the day when Europeans might test their patience. Among the Mississippian confederacies, the pressure is immediate. Firearms filter into certain tribes, upsetting balances of power centuries in the making. Rivalries sharpen. Entire wars erupt over access to European trade routes. Some councils embrace the newcomers as allies, others call them poison. The river valleys boil with both opportunity and danger, and the Europeans, few though they are, become decisive pawns in these struggles. Back in Europe, monarchs weigh their positions. They begin to accept a new truth. The Americas are not lands to be conquered in swift campaigns, but powers to be managed, played against one another, slowly undermined. Warships may cross the ocean, but so too do spies, missionaries, and diplomats. The first century of hesitation is over. The 17th century will not be hesitation at all. It will be entanglement. The Atlantic is now a web of routes, fishing fleets, fur traders, scattered settlements, and cautious embassies. What once was a rumor has become routine. But routine is fragile. With every passing year, the stakes grow higher, and both Europe and the Americas sense the shift. England clings to its coastal settlements. Life is harsh, but tobacco, discovered, cultivated, and shipped east, becomes the lifeline. Demand in London surges. Suddenly, the colonies are not just vanity projects. They are economic engines. Settlers, once starving and desperate, are reinforced with fresh waves of migrants chasing profit. Timber, tobacco, and furs begin to fill English ships, and the crown sees its gamble paying off. Yet conflict with nearby confederacies intensifies. Treaties are signed and broken. Trade sometimes ends in blood. Neither side trusts the other, yet both need what the other offers. France deepens its foothold in the St. Lawrence. Jesuits arrive, bringing faith as well as trade. Some tribes welcome alliances against rivals. Others resent the growing foreign presence. French captains learn to navigate politics as carefully as rivers. They are fewer in number than the English, but better integrated, more willing to adapt. Paris applauds cautiously. Spain, however, suffers humiliation. Its envoys in Mexico City are tightly controlled by the Aztec emperor. Trade occurs under strict surveillance, foreign merchants confined to quarters, unable to spread influence freely. Spanish captains write bitter reports. The empire of Tenochtitlan is no naive kingdom. It is as disciplined and suspicious as any European court. Dreams of conquest vanish. The reality of stalemate sets in. Spain's prestige slips, its rivals mock its failures, and its colonies lag behind. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the empires grow more aware of the creeping foreign tide. The Aztec rulers begin to debate foreign policy more seriously. Some argue for cutting off trade entirely, fearing foreign spies. Others insist that European tools and steel must be absorbed to strengthen the empire. Priests weave prophecies into politics, warning of divine upheaval should outsiders gain too much influence. Markets swell with curiosity over imported goods, but suspicion grows. The empire senses it stands at the edge of a new kind of conflict, one not of spears and obsidian alone, but of ideas, alliances, and shadows. The Inca, far to the south, adopt a harder line. The Sapa Inca declares that foreigners are to be confined to controlled enclaves, never allowed to wander freely. Incan engineers replicate steel weapons with local skill, reducing dependence on trade. They fortify ports, expand armies, and prepare for the day when Europeans might test their patience. Among the Mississippian confederacies, the pressure is immediate. Firearms filter into certain tribes, upsetting balances of power centuries in the making. Rivalries sharpen. Entire wars erupt over access to European trade routes. Some councils embrace the newcomers as allies, others call them poison. The river valleys boil with both opportunity and danger, and the Europeans, few though they are, become decisive pawns in these struggles. Back in Europe, monarchs weigh their positions. They begin to accept a new truth. The Americas are not lands to be conquered in swift campaigns, but powers to be managed, played against one another, slowly undermined. Warships may cross the ocean, but so too do spies, missionaries, and diplomats. The first century of hesitation is over. The 17th century will not be hesitation at all. It will be entanglement. Europe burns. The 30 Years' War rages across the Holy Roman Empire, sucking in France, Spain, Sweden, and countless smaller states. Fields are trampled, cities starve, armies dissolve and reform in endless cycles of slaughter. While cannons thunder in Europe, the Atlantic world continues to evolve, and the echoes of Europe's wars cross the ocean as surely as any ship. For France, this is both curse and opportunity. Burdened by war at home, the crown cannot pour armies into the St. Lawrence. Yet the fur trade flourishes nonetheless, driven not by Paris but by merchants and missionaries on the frontier. Jesuits weave themselves deeper into native confederacies, writing long letters about politics and customs, sketching maps, and slowly altering the balance of power. French firearms flow into some tribes but not others, reshaping alliances like ripples on water. The crown, distracted in Europe, scarcely notices that its foothold across the ocean is growing roots of its own. England under Charles I sees its colonies as both asset and liability. Tobacco exports enrich merchants, but religious tensions at home spill outward. Dissenters cross the Atlantic seeking freedom, planting communities with stubborn independence. These settlers are not mere extensions of the crown. They are fractious, quarrelsome, self-directed. Their survival depends as much on negotiation with native confederacies as on royal backing. Wars flare, truces follow, and the uneasy pattern of coexistence continues. Spain, entangled in the 30 Years' War and drained of silver it never gained, finds its empire crumbling. Its Caribbean forts remain, but attempts to penetrate the Aztec or Inca realms are rebuffed with brutal efficiency. Spaniards still write of marvels, cities on lakes, roads across mountains, but they no longer speak confidently of conquest. Pride falters, and rivals mock Spain as a lion with broken teeth. Across the Atlantic, the American empires grow stronger in their own ways. The Aztec rulers, emboldened by victory against Spain a decade earlier, expand reforms. They demand stricter control over tribute, but also experiment with foreign trade under supervision. Steel weapons appear in markets, woven into native warfare. Priests rail against foreign corruption, but merchants insist on balance. The empire must adapt or stagnate. Aztec politics begin to fracture between traditionalists and reformers, but the state itself remains powerful. The Inca, ever pragmatic, fortify their coastal defenses and expand their road systems even further. The Sapa Inca commissions new foundries, seeking to master metallurgy at a scale to rival Europe. Firearms are studied obsessively, replicated imperfectly but slowly improved. By the 1640s, Inca armies carry a mix of traditional weapons and crude muskets, a fusion of worlds. In the Mississippi valleys, the confederacies are transformed. Wars of succession, trade rivalries, and shifting alliances rage across the rivers. Some tribes rise to prominence by monopolizing access to European goods. Others decline or scatter. Europeans find themselves dragged into conflicts they scarcely understand, trading powder and shot to allies who use them in wars that reshape entire regions. By 1648, when the 30 Years' War ends in Europe, the Atlantic is unrecognizable. No empire has conquered another. Instead, a tangled web of alliances, wars, and rivalries now spans both continents. Europe once dreamed of dominion. Instead, it has birthed a second arena of power, a world where Aztec, Inca, Mississippian, and countless other peoples hold their own against crowns and parliaments across the sea. The question of the new century is not who will rule the Americas, but whether Europe and the Americas can coexist without destroying each other. Europe emerges from exhaustion. The 30 Years' War is over, but its scars run deep. Ruined cities, shattered populations, monarchs drained of coin and patience. Yet from that devastation comes a new clarity. Kings and ministers recognize that survival depends on trade and colonies. The Atlantic, once a distraction, is now seen as the future. England pushes hardest. Civil war has toppled Charles III, and the Commonwealth under Cromwell turns its gaze outward. Colonies along the Atlantic coast multiply, swelling with migrants fleeing turmoil at home. Tobacco remains the great export, but now timber, furs, and even experimental crops flow into London's markets. Conflicts with native confederacies continue, sometimes bloody, sometimes negotiated, but the English are relentless. Every year more ships arrive, every year more land is claimed. France, too, stabilizes. The monarchy consolidates under Louis XIV, and though he is still young, his ministers see the St. Lawrence as a jewel worth polishing. Jesuit reports flood Paris, describing not only tribes and trade, but also rival Europeans encroaching. Fur remains lucrative, but French officials begin to imagine something greater, a chain of alliances and settlements stretching deep into the interior, binding the rivers of North America into a network under French influence. Spain, by contrast, fades further. Its wars have bankrupted it, and its Caribbean holdings are besieged by English and French privateers. Attempts to force entry into Aztec Mexico or the Andes meet fierce resistance. The once feared Spanish tercios now look outdated, and their fleets no longer sail unchallenged. In this alternate history, Spain becomes a warning to others. Delay too long, and the world moves past you. And in the Americas, the great powers are anything but passive. The Aztec Empire of 1650 is a study in controlled adaptation. Its emperors permit foreign trade but enforce rigid laws to prevent infiltration. Steel weapons are now common among its elite warriors. Imported gunpowder weapons appear in ceremonies as symbols of strength. Priests warn of corruption, but younger nobles see the benefits. An empire that evolves is an empire that endures. Envoys travel to coastal settlements, observing foreign colonies, reporting their strengths and weaknesses. The Aztec no longer merely react, they plan. The Inca, high in the Andes, continue their dual path of resistance and assimilation. Their smiths improve metallurgy, crafting weapons that blend European form with Andean ingenuity. Their engineers expand terraces and irrigation systems, increasing food production to feed ever larger armies. Fortresses bristle along the coast, and Inca generals boast that no foreign fleet could breach them. Though distant from Europe's centers of power, the Andes remain a fortress of their own. The Mississippian confederacies enter an age of upheaval. Firearms have transformed warfare, alliances shift rapidly, and some tribes grow dominant while others collapse. European traders exploit these divisions, playing one side against another. Yet confederacies adapt as well, forming larger leagues, councils, and federations to resist encroachment. What emerges is not chaos, but a new political order, one that Europeans cannot easily break. By the 1660s, the Atlantic has become a true battleground of civilizations. Not a conquest, not a collapse, but a tense balance of power, where every shipment of furs, every treaty, every battle on a riverbank may tip the scales. Europe believes it has recovered, but across the ocean, the empires of the Americas are no longer fragile. They are ready. The stage is set for conflicts unlike anything history has ever seen. Wars not of one-sided conquest, but of equals. For more than a century and a half, Europe and the Americas have circled one another warily, trading, probing, testing. Now, at last, the lines harden. Rivalry becomes confrontation. England is the most aggressive. Its coastal colonies have multiplied, no longer fragile footholds but sprawling settlements. Tobacco exports pour wealth into London, while new crops, maize and potatoes, reshape diets back home. Yet expansion breeds conflict. Native confederacies resist encroachment fiercely, forming alliances to defend their lands. In 1675, one of these alliances launches a coordinated assault across multiple English settlements. Villages burn, fields are razed, and settlers flee. The English retaliate brutally, sending militias and mercenaries deep into native territories. The war drags on for years, leaving both sides bloodied but unbroken. Neither yields. France pursues a subtler strategy. From Quebec to the Great Lakes, its traders knit alliances with tribes, offering firearms and metal in exchange for loyalty. By the 1680s, the French have forged a sprawling network of allies, not colonies, a web of diplomacy as much as settlement. Yet this strategy breeds resentment. Some tribes, excluded from trade, turn hostile. Raids erupt, fueled by desperation and rivalry. France learns that its influence is strong but fragile, dependent on trust that can vanish overnight. Spain grows desperate. Its empire in this timeline never reaches the heights of history. In the Caribbean, its forts fall prey to English and French raids. On the mainland, repeated attempts to intimidate the Aztec collapse. In 1678, a Spanish expedition inland ends in disaster. Ambushed by Aztec armies wielding a terrifying blend of steel, obsidian, and early muskets. Survivors limp back to their ships, their commander executed as a warning. Spain's prestige shatters. Madrid begins to question whether its Atlantic dream is already dead. Meanwhile, the American empires transform under pressure. The Aztec rulers of the late 17th century embrace a policy their ancestors would scarcely recognize. Controlled modernization. Muskets, once rare curiosities, are now forged in workshops across the empire. Aztec engineers adapt European cannon designs, mounting them on fortresses guarding Tenochtitlan. Merchants thrive in a new age of hybrid trade, blending local crafts with foreign steel. Priests still decry corruption, but younger nobles see clearly. Survival demands adaptation. The Aztec are no longer merely resisting. They are preparing to compete. In the Andes, the Inca perfect their fusion of old and new. Their muskets remain crude compared to Europe's, but their armies are immense, disciplined, and supplied by terraces that stretch across mountains. Roads carry troops faster than European colonists can march. When Portuguese traders push too far inland in 1682, they are repelled with ruthless efficiency. The Sapa Inca proclaims victory not just as defense, but as proof of divine favor. And in the Mississippi valleys, a storm brews. Confederacies have grown powerful through firearms and trade, but also unstable. Some tribes align with France, others with England. Still others attempt independence. Wars erupt, sometimes spanning hundreds of miles, leaving villages burned and populations scattered. Yet out of this chaos emerges something new. Larger coalitions, pan-tribal alliances forged not just against rivals, but against Europeans themselves. By the 1680s, the river valleys rumble with the beginnings of a continental movement. Fragmented, fragile, but dangerous. The Atlantic world in 1685 is no longer an experiment. It is an arena. Every side, European crowns, Aztec emperors, Inca rulers, Mississippian chiefs, now recognizes the truth. Coexistence is temporary. The next century will not be diplomacy alone. It will be war. The Atlantic has ceased to be a frontier. It is now a battlefield where civilizations test each other's limits. For over a century, Europe and the Americas have traded, probed, and warred in fragments. Now the scale widens. England enters this decade determined. Its colonies stretch further inland, bound by rivers and fortified settlements. Tobacco remains king, but wheat and timber rise in importance as settlers multiply. Yet the native confederacies grow no weaker. In 1692, an alliance of tribes launches coordinated raids that wipe out entire towns. English militias retaliate with equal fury, igniting a war that drags into the decade's end. In London, pamphlets praise the settlers' resilience, but private letters whisper a darker truth. The colonies may never truly dominate their neighbors. France, embroiled in wars against England in Europe, mirrors the conflict across the ocean. French allied tribes battle English allied tribes, the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes becoming extensions of European rivalry. Canoes skim rivers with muskets flashing. Villages burn. Prisoners are marched across vast distances. Yet unlike Europe, Neither side can overwhelm the other. The wars of the 1690s prove stalemate, a grinding struggle that exhausts but does not resolve. Spain grows desperate. Its Caribbean forts are raided relentlessly. In 1697, in a final attempt to assert dominance, Madrid sends a massive fleet toward Mexico, determined to force tribute from the Aztec Empire. It is a gamble born of pride. The fleet lands tens of thousands of soldiers, armed with cannon, muskets, and cavalry. For weeks they march inland. But this is not 1519. This is 1697. The Aztec Empire meets them with muskets of their own, regiments drilled with European precision, obsidian-edged weapons still devastating in close combat. On the plains outside Tenochtitlan, one of the largest battles of the century erupts. Spanish cannon tear holes in Aztec ranks, but numbers press in on all sides. Spain's aura of invincibility is shattered utterly. The lesson is undeniable. The Aztec are no fragile people. They are a power. Meanwhile, in the Andes, the Inca expand their defensive perimeter. Reports of the Spanish disaster embolden them. They expand fortresses, improve muskets, and dispatch emissaries to other native powers. Whispers grow of a continental alliance, Aztec and Inca envoys trading words across jungles and seas. The possibility of unity, once unthinkable, begins to take root. In the Mississippi valleys, the wars of the 1690s transform into something larger. Confederacies, once fractured, begin to see common cause. Leaders speak of resisting European encroachment as one people. Though divisions remain, the seeds of a pan-tribal movement are sown. Europeans sense it too, and grow fearful. By 1700, the world has entered a new phase. The Atlantic is not the site of conquest, but of balance. The balance, however, grows precarious. Every war is bloodier. Every trade carries suspicion. Every treaty is temporary. The 18th century will not be discovery, nor colonization, but collision. The century turns with drums of war echoing on both sides of the Atlantic. The world has entered a new age, not one of exploration, but of confrontation. England grows stronger. Its colonies swell with migrants, and its navy dominates the North Atlantic. Tobacco exports continue, but now sugar from Caribbean plantations rivals it. Yet expansion comes at an unending cost. Native confederacies, bound by alliances and shared resentment, launch coordinated raids in 1707 that devastate frontier towns. English militias retaliate, sparking a war so brutal that even Parliament debates whether the colonies are worth the blood spilled. But merchants in London see only the profits, and reinforcements sail anyway. France, locked in the War of the Spanish Succession, views the Atlantic as a secondary battlefield. Yet French traders and Jesuits deepen their networks, ensuring that France's presence in the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes is not lost. French allied tribes clash with English allied tribes, the violence of Europe mirrored across oceans. Canoes filled with warriors fire muskets across frozen rivers, while European captains struggle to direct conflicts they no longer fully control. Spain staggers. The 1697 disaster against the Aztec has crippled its ambition. Its Caribbean forts crumble under raids. Its fleets grow scarce. By 1710, Spain is no longer feared but pitied, a relic of past glory. Other crowns begin circling its holdings like vultures. And what of the American empires? The Aztec, emboldened by their victory, shift from defense to ambition. Emperors commission new fleets of war canoes fitted with cannon, patrolling the Gulf to ward off European intrusion. Muskets are standardized. Drilled regiments patrol borders, and spies report on European settlements. For the first time, Aztec emissaries cross the Atlantic, not as captives, but as ambassadors. In 1712, one arrives in Paris, clad in feathered regalia and steel, to negotiate directly with the French court. The spectacle shocks Europe, an American empire treating with Europe as equal. In the Andes, the Inca fortify their highland domains and experiment with centralizing trade to compete with European imports. Incan muskets remain crude, but their armies are immense, their logistics unrivaled. The Sapa Inca sees opportunity in Spain's decline. Scouts report on Portuguese and English incursions along the coast. Plans form for a united Andean naval presence, small but growing, designed to block foreign landings. The Mississippi valleys boil. Confederacies, long fractured, now forge greater leagues to resist European encroachment. Firearms, horses, and native diplomacy combine into a force Europeans can neither control nor suppress. In 1715, an uprising sweeps through the southeast, destroying forts and scattering settlers. Colonists flee to coastal enclaves. Native warriors retake old territories. For the first time, Europeans whisper that the river valleys may never be theirs at all. By 1720, the Atlantic balance is clear. Conquest has failed. Colonies survive, yes, but only as contested footholds. Trade thrives, but under constant threat. Alliances shift like sand, and wars burn unpredictably. The 18th century does not open with European supremacy. It opens with parity. Civilizations on both sides stand armed, wary, and ready. The next great war will not decide who discovers the world. It will decide who inherits it. The Atlantic has become a chessboard. Its pieces no longer pawns, but queens and kings in their own right. Europe's colonies are no longer experiments, and the American empires are no longer naive. The 17th century was rivalry. The 18th will be war. England, its settlements along the coast multiplying, pushes relentlessly inland. Tobacco and sugar enrich merchants, but expansion gnaws at the patience of native confederacies. In 1727, a massive league of tribes unites to resist English encroachment. For months, raids and counter-raids devastate the frontier. English militias call it savagery. Native leaders call it survival. Both sides write to Europe, one demanding reinforcements, the other demanding recognition. France plays its subtler game. From Quebec down the Mississippi, its influence spreads through alliances, not sheer numbers. But by the 1730s, this influence collides with English ambition. Tribes once neutral are forced to choose sides, muskets and powder deciding loyalties. The forests echo with war parties, their banners mixing French fleur-de-lis with native totems. Paris and London recognize that their colonial struggles are now inseparable from their rivalry in Europe. Spain fades still further. Its once proud empire is fractured. In the Caribbean, English and French seize islands with impunity. On the mainland, Aztec armies press Spanish forts until they crumble. By 1735, Madrid faces the truth. Its power is broken. Spain, in this alternate history, becomes little more than a ghost of empire. But the great shift is not European. It is American. The Aztec Empire, thriving from trade and emboldened by victory, sharpens its ambitions. Tenochtitlan, rebuilt and expanded, is now a city of 500,000, humming with both tradition and innovation. Muskets drill beside obsidian clubs, cannons roar in ritual displays, and fleets of hybrid warships patrol the coasts. By the 1740s, Aztec emissaries travel regularly to Europe, negotiating not as subjects but equals. Some European courts welcome them as allies, others fear them as rivals, but no one dismisses them. In the Andes, the Inca pursue a quieter path of consolidation. Their armies remain vast, their logistics unmatched, their fortresses unassailable. Slowly, their artisans refine firearms, their smiths mastering alloys, their generals blending European tactics with Andean discipline. The Sapa Inca declares that the Andes will remain unconquered forever, and for now, no power dares test the claim. The Mississippi valleys become the hinge of history. Confederacies once fractured now coalesce into leagues, drawn together by necessity. In the 1740s, a pan-tribal council forms, the first of its kind, uniting leaders from river to coast. Their goal is clear: resist European expansion as one. Armed with French and English muskets, mounted on horses and bound by shared defiance, they begin to act not as fragmented tribes, but as a proto-nation. By 1745, the storm breaks. England and France, locked in war in Europe, ignite their colonies. Settlers march with red coats, French traders rally native allies, and the Mississippi Council declares itself against both crowns. The Aztec, wary but opportunistic, send emissaries offering trade and muskets in exchange for alliances. The Inca fortify, ready to strike if Europeans press too far south. For the first time, war is no longer scattered skirmishes. It is transatlantic. Armies march on both continents, navies clash on both oceans, and every empire, European or American, chooses a side. The age of discovery is long past. The age of collision has begun. For 2 centuries, Europe and the Americas have circled one another, clashing in fragments, testing each other's limits. Now the threads tighten into a single cord, pulled taut across the ocean. War is no longer local. It is global. England and France, bitter rivals, drag their colonies into open conflict. In Europe, their armies maneuver across Flanders and Germany. In North America, settlers and soldiers clash in forests and rivers, while native confederacies, long divided, now act as decisive powers. Some ally with the French, others with the English, but many rally under the Mississippi Council, declaring independence from both. By 1756, the struggle is no longer English versus French. It is English versus French versus a pan-tribal resistance, each side armed, determined, unwilling to yield. The Aztec watch carefully. Their empire thrives, Tenochtitlan richer than ever, its docks filled with trade goods from across the Atlantic. Emperors recognize opportunity. If Europeans bleed themselves against each other, the Aztec can expand influence quietly. They send muskets and envoys northward, whispering promises of alliance to the Mississippi leagues. They tighten their grip on the Gulf, patrolling with warships that no longer merely defend, but project power. The Aztec are not just surviving, they are beginning to rival Europe itself. In the Andes, the Inca strengthen their hold. Their smiths now produce muskets at scale, crude but functional, enough to arm vast armies. They reinforce fortresses, extend roads, and establish a disciplined coastal navy. When Portuguese traders attempt to establish colonies along the southern coast in 1760, Inca fleets repel them decisively. The Andes remain closed, guarded, and unyielding. Spain by now is irrelevant. Its Caribbean islands are seized one by one, its fleets broken, its glory gone. Madrid watches helplessly as the empire it once dreamed of collapses into memory. By 1763, the Great War reaches climax. In Europe, treaties are signed to halt the endless drain of blood. But across the Atlantic, peace proves impossible. England claims victory against France, seizing forts and trade routes. But the Mississippi Council remains unconquered. Aztec fleets continue to patrol the Gulf. Inca armies block the Andes, and settlers along the coast realize the truth. Their colonies are not masters of the land, but footholds clinging to its edge. The balance of power in 1765 is stark. Europe is fractured, exhausted, struggling to project dominance. The American empires are vibrant, modernizing, and unbroken. And for the first time, whispers rise in European courts. Perhaps the future does not belong to Europe alone. Perhaps the Americas will not be possessions but peers. The 18th century has reached its turning point. The next struggle will decide not simply territory, but the very idea of who leads the world. Across the Atlantic world, the old rhythms of rivalry and survival give way to something sharper: upheaval. In Europe, discontent simmers. Wars have drained treasuries, taxes climb, and monarchs stagger under the weight of endless debt. Philosophers write of liberty, equality, and the rights of man. But unlike our history, these ideas do not spread into colonies longing to break free from a European yoke. They spread into a world where Europe itself is not master, where its colonies are fragile and contested, where indigenous and imperial powers stand shoulder to shoulder, or across from one another, debating their futures. England's coastal colonies have grown numerous, but they are ringed by enemies. Confederacies inland, Aztec fleets to the south, French rivals to the north. Settlers complain of being used as pawns in distant wars, their lives spent for London's glory. Murmurs of rebellion stir, but the colonies know they cannot act alone. In 1775, Colonial delegates meet not merely among themselves, but with emissaries from the Mississippi Council. The talks are tense. Europeans and natives sit at one table, mistrust heavy in the air, but necessity outweighs history. An unprecedented alliance forms, not out of love, but out of shared hatred for imperial exploitation. France, weakened by defeats, nurtures its North American allies more carefully. French traders and missionaries have long woven themselves into native confederacies, and now they offer open support against English dominance. Paris sees not colonies but partners who can be armed, funded, and trusted to bleed England further. The Aztec, by the 1770s, are no longer simply guarding their empire. They are exporting revolution of their own kind. Emperors support uprisings against Europeans, funneling muskets and powder into Mississippi villages and English colonies alike. In 1780, Aztec fleets clash openly with English squadrons in the Caribbean, sinking ships and seizing prizes. For the first time, a non-European navy defeats a European one in major battle. The world takes notice. In the Andes, the Inca remain aloof but vigilant. Their empire thrives, food surpluses feed vast populations, and their armies are unmatched on land. But whispers of European revolt reach Cusco, and the Sapa Inca contemplates his own opportunities. He authorizes cautious support for uprisings, seeing chaos as a chance to strengthen Andean autonomy even further. Spain, by this century, is little more than a shadow. Its monarchy watches as other powers carve the Atlantic world into spheres of influence, powerless to stop it. Once feared, now pitied. By 1789, the spark of revolution ignites in Europe itself. In France, the monarchy falls, Paris erupts, and the revolution proclaims liberty to the world. In this alternate history, the proclamation does not fall on colonies desperate for independence. It falls into a world already fractured by balance, alliances, and native power. French revolutionaries send envoys not only to London or Berlin, but to Tenochtitlan and the Mississippi Council, declaring solidarity against monarchies old and new. The age of revolutions is no longer European alone. It is Atlantic. It is shared. It is contested. By 1795, the great question is no longer whether Europe will rule the Americas. The question is whether Europe will even rule itself.